Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be talking all about communication, how to do it effectively and how to really build strong relationships using it.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to be looking at this article called Effective Communication Tips for Stronger Relationships, a comprehensive guide for women.
Okay.
Now, I know that all sounds a little specific, but
Yeah.
really the tips and the insights in this article I think are valuable for anyone, no
Absolutely.
matter what gender you are.
It's about connecting.
Yeah. Who wouldn't want stronger, more fulfilling connections in their life, right?
Sure.
So the article really kind of hits on how crucial communication is. And this is something we talk about a lot.
hmm
It's the foundation of trust.
It really is.
It's how we navigate conflict. It's
Yeah.
how we really create those deep connections with people. But it also highlights these communication barriers
Yeah.
that we all kind of fall into. And it was so funny reading this article
Oh, yeah.
because I was like, oh my gosh, this is me.
Totally.
Especially the part about active listening
Right.
or the lack thereof.
Right.
I was reading that and I thought,
Mm.
oh gosh, how often am I, so busy thinking about my next brilliant point
Yeah. Yeah.
that I'm not really listening to what the other person is saying?
It's so common. We get so caught up in our own heads and, like you said, planning our response, and we miss the nuances of what the other person is saying and the emotions behind the words.
It really is the difference between just hearing and truly listening.
Absolutely.
And I think in today's world, it's so fast paced, there's so many distractions.
Yeah.
Is active listening becoming a lost art?
It's a concern, but it's something that, with awareness and effort, we can revive.
Yeah, for
The article has some great tips on that.
Yeah, and I think it's with practice and awareness. But
hmm
before we get into those tips, I want to talk about the other barriers that the article points out,
Okay.
because I think these are so important to be aware of. And the next one is assumptions. And I am so guilty of this one, thinking I know what someone's going to say or how they're feeling.
Yeah.
And I project my own experiences onto them without even realizing it.
We all do it to some extent.
Yeah.
It's natural. We're trying to use our mental shortcuts and make sense of the world. But the problem is everybody has their own unique perspective and lens through which they see the world. And so those assumptions can often lead to misunderstandings.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's the emotional roller coaster,
Oh,
where
yeah.
you're in a heated conversation and your emotions just take over and logic goes out the window.
You're hijacked by the amygdala.
Huh?
It's
Yeah.
that fight or flight part of the brain. We're not thinking clearly. We're just reacting.
It's so true, and I've definitely been there. And in those moments, like deep breaths are key.
Absolutely. Taking that pause allows the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, to come back online.
It's so fascinating how all that works.
It is.
All right, so last barrier we're going to touch on, and then we'll get into the good stuff, the solutions. Nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
And it's so true. The article talks about it's not just our words, but it's our whole vibe.
Everything.
Body language, our
Mhm.
tone of voice, everything.
It's amazing how much is conveyed through those nonverbal channels.
Oh, and the article said that 93% of communication is nonverbal.
Yeah.
And that just kind of blew my mind. I thought, are we walking around sending all these unintended messages?
It's quite possible.
Yeah.
We might be saying one thing with our words, but our body language is telling a completely different story, and that can lead to all kinds of mix-ups.
It's like we're secret agents of nonverbal communication,
Right.
leaving hidden messages everywhere we go.
Yeah.
So how do we become more aware of these silent signals,
Yeah.
both the ones we're sending and the ones we're receiving?
That's where these practical tips come in, and I think they can be really helpful.
Yeah, let's unlock these secrets.
Okay.
Let's dive in.
Let's do it.
So we just talked about all these communication roadblocks.
Right.
And I'm sitting here thinking, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I've been doing all of these things.
Tot-
But the good news is the article doesn't just point out the problems, it also gives us some solutions.
It does.
So let's dive into some of those.
Okay.
The first one is active listening.
Okay.
And, we hear that phrase all the time, but
Yeah.
it's more than just nodding along.
Absolutely.
What does it actually mean to be an active listener?
Well, one of the techniques the article highlights is something called reflective listening.
Okay, reflective listening.
Yeah, have you heard of that?
I have heard of that. I'm not sure I fully understand it.
Okay, so it's about taking what the other person is saying and reflecting back not only the words, but the emotions behind the words.
Okay.
So, for example, instead of just saying, oh, it sounds like you're really stressed about work,
Right.
you might say, it sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed and maybe a little eventful about this extra workload.
Wow. So it's like you're taking their words and you're reflecting back the deeper meaning.
Exactly. You're acknowledging what's going on beneath the surface.
I love that. And it's interesting because it makes me think about something we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
which is empathy.
Yes.
And the article talks about empathy as this core communication skill.
It really is.
But empathy is more than just sympathy.
It is. Sympathy is more about feeling sorry for someone,
Right.
whereas empathy is about feeling with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's about putting yourself in their shoes and seeing the world through their eyes.
Okay, and that makes total sense.
Mm.
But I think sometimes, empathy can feel like this superpower that I don't possess.
Yeah.
So how do we cultivate empathy if it doesn't come naturally?
Well, one really powerful practice is to pay attention to nonverbal cues.
Okay.
We talked about those before.
Right.
But those subtle shifts in facial expression, tone of voice, even posture,
Mm-hmm.
those can reveal so much about what someone is feeling, even if their words are saying something different.
So it's like we have to learn a new language.
It is.
The language of emotions.
Yeah. The language of emotions, yes. And the more fluent we become in that language, the more easily we can connect with others on that empathetic level.
That's beautiful. And so are there any other tips, in terms of cultivating empathy? Is there anything else we can do?
Well, asking open-ended questions.
Okay.
So instead of jumping in with advice or trying to fix the problem,
Yeah.
just holding space for them to share their experience.
That's so important because I think sometimes we just want to jump in and fix things.
Yes.
But really what people need is to just be heard.
To feel heard and understood. That's it.
Exactly. And I think that can really shift the dynamic of a conversation, especially when we're talking about conflict.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if both people can approach the conflict with empathy, then it's not about winning or losing.
Right.
It's about finding a solution together.
It becomes a collaboration
Yeah.
rather than a battle.
I love that reframing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about active listening, reflective listening, empathy, how those all kind of work together.
Yeah.
What about some of the other communication tips in the article?
Okay.
Like clarity and conciseness.
Yeah.
That seems pretty straightforward. But
It does-
is there more to it than just saying what you mean?
So it's about being direct but not aggressive.
Okay.
And one of the things the article talks about is using I statements.
Oh, I statements.
Yeah.
This is a big one.
They're really helpful.
Can you give me an example? Because I'm still not sure I fully grasp it.
Sure. So let's say you're feeling frustrated because your partner always leaves their dirty dishes in the sink.
Okay, classic.
So instead of saying you always leave your dishes everywhere, it's so annoying,
Right.
you could say, I feel frustrated when I see dirty dishes in the sink because it makes me feel like our shared space isn't being respected.
Oh, I see the difference.
Yeah.
Because the first one is like,
It's blaming.
yeah, you're attacked.
You're attacking them. Yeah.
Whereas the second one, you're focusing on how you feel.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that when we use I statements, it takes the other person off the defensive,
Okay.
and it allows for a more constructive conversation.
So it's less about blame
Yeah.
and more about just expressing your needs.
Exactly.
That's really helpful. And it kind of goes back to that collaboration idea.
It does.
It's like you're both on the same team.
We're in this together.
Yeah. Okay. So another big one that I think we all struggle with
Uh-huh.
is managing emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Because let's face it, sometimes conversations get heated
They do.
and it can feel impossible to stay calm.
It can. But that's why it's so important to develop emotional regulation skills.
Okay. So what are some tips for how to stay cool under pressure?
Well, one of the simplest but most effective techniques is the power of the pause.
Pause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you feel those emotions rising, just take a moment to step back, take a few deep breaths, and gather your thoughts.
Sometimes I literally have to walk away for a minute.
And that's okay. It's much better to take a break than to say something you'll regret later.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
So pause, breathe,
Yeah,
and respond. Don't react.
exactly.
Okay, got it.
All right.
All right, so let's talk about nonverbal communication.
Right.
Because earlier we were joking about being secret agents of nonverbal cues.
Right.
But seriously, how do we become more aware of our own body language and what we're projecting to other people?
Well, it starts with mindfulness, paying attention to our posture, our facial expressions, our hand gestures. Are we tense and closed off, or are we relaxed and open?
Yeah.
Are we making eye contact or avoiding it?
I've noticed even just in my own life
Yeah.
that if I consciously try to keep my body language open,
Yes.
like uncross my arms,
Yeah.
make eye contact, even just smile,
Yeah.
I actually feel more relaxed
Absolutely.
and receptive in the conversation.
That's that mind-body connection.
It's
Our
amazing.
physical state influences our mental and emotional state and vice versa.
Yeah, so it's not just about faking it till you make it. It's about actually embodying
Embodying,
that
yes.
energy that you want to bring.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah, and when we're mindful of our own nonverbal cues, we also become more attuned to what other people are communicating nonverbally.
It's like you're reading between the lines.
Exactly, you're picking up on those subtle cues that might not be spoken but are still very powerful.
That's so powerful. All right, so another key ingredient for effective communication, being open to feedback.
Yes.
Ooh, feedback. I don't know about you, but
It can be tough.
I get a little tense when I hear that word.
Yeah, it's vulnerable to receive feedback,
It is.
especially if it's critical, but if we can reframe it as an opportunity for growth,
Okay,
it can make a big difference.
so it's not about being attacked or criticized. It's about,
It's about learning and growing.
yeah, and getting information that can help you be better.
Yes.
So how do we get better at receiving feedback even when it's hard?
Well, the key is to listen without interrupting or getting defensive. Ask clarifying questions if you need to, but resist the urge to explain yourself or justify your actions. Just really absorb the information.
And I think it's important to remember, even if the delivery isn't great,
Yes.
the message itself might still be valuable.
Right.
Yeah, and to express gratitude for the feedback, even if it's hard to hear.
It goes a long way. It shows that you value the other person's perspective.
Absolutely. Okay, so feedback check.
Check.
Now let's talk about setting healthy boundaries.
Ooh, good one.
This is another one that could be tricky,
It can.
especially in close relationships.
Yeah.
Why are boundaries so important?
Well, boundaries are essential for self-respect.
Okay.
And for maintaining healthy relationships, it's about knowing your limits and communicating them clearly and respectfully.
You know what I struggle with?
What's that?
Is feeling guilty when I say no to people.
Yeah.
Like I'm letting them down or I'm being selfish.
That's so common. We're often conditioned to put other people's needs before our own. But setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's self-care.
Okay.
It's about honoring your own needs and creating space for yourself to thrive.
That makes sense. But how do we set boundaries without seeming harsh or uncaring?
Well, it's about being assertive,
Assertive.
which means stating your needs clearly and confidently without being aggressive or apologetic.
Okay, so it's that sweet spot between being a pushover
Yeah.
and being a dictator.
Exactly. It's about respecting yourself and respecting the other person.
Any tips on how to phrase those boundary-setting statements?
Well, you can use I statements here too.
Okay.
So, for example, you could say, I need some alone time in the evenings to recharge, or I'm not comfortable discussing that topic.
And it's okay to just say no
It is.
without giving a big explanation.
You have the right to decline requests that don't align with your boundaries.
That is so empowering
It is.
to hear because I think so often we feel like we have to over-explain
Yeah.
and then we end up feeling resentful.
Right. Your needs are just as important as anyone else's.
I love that. All right, last but not least,
Okay.
conflict resolution.
The big one.
Because conflict is inevitable,
In any relationship, yes.
but it doesn't have to be destructive.
Right. It can actually strengthen relationships if it's handled constructively.
So how do we do that?
Well, the key is to approach conflict with a collaborative mindset.
Okay.
Focus on solutions rather than blame.
So instead of trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong,
Right.
it's how do we solve this together?
Exactly. And that often involves compromise. Finding that middle ground where both people feel heard and respected, even if they don't get everything they want.
And the article talks about taking responsibility
Yes.
for your own role in the conflict.
That's huge. Even if we feel like we're only 10% at fault,
Right.
owning that 10% can really de-escalate the situation and create an atmosphere of mutual respect.
And sometimes just a simple apology can go a long way.
It can.
Yeah.
It shows humility and a willingness to move forward.
As we're going through all of this, I'm realizing that it's not just about the techniques and the strategies.
Yeah.
It's really about shifting our mindset.
It is.
It's about approaching these interactions
Yeah.
with empathy,
Mm.
understanding.
Connection.
Yeah, a genuine desire to connect.
Beautifully said.
And speaking of connection,
Yes.
we haven't even talked about nonverbal communication
I know we've touched on it a little bit.
and how that plays a role in building those deeper bonds.
So much to say about that.
I think we need a whole other section for that.
We do. You need to dive into that.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back,
Mhm.
and we've talked about so many valuable communication skills.
We have.
Active listening,
Uh-huh.
empathy,
Mm-hmm.
managing emotions,
Right.
setting boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
conflict resolution, all that good stuff.
Foundation.
But now we need to talk about the unspoken language,
Yes.
nonverbal communication.
It's a secret language.
And it's so fascinating because, like we touched on earlier, we communicate so much without even realizing it.
We do. It's constant.
Yeah, so how do we become more aware of these messages that we're sending and receiving?
Well, I think the first step is to just start paying attention to our own body language.
Okay.
How are we holding ourselves?
Yeah.
What are our facial expressions like?
Mm-hmm.
Our tone of voice?
Uh-huh.
All of these things are sending messages.
So we're like walking billboards.
Yeah, we're broadcasting our emotions whether we intend to or not.
And, I think once we start to become aware of our own nonverbal cues, then we can start to notice those cues in other people.
Absolutely. It's like developing a new sense.
Yeah.
It's like learning to read between the lines.
So imagine you're having a conversation with someone and they're saying they're fine,
Right.
but their shoulders are slumped, their voice is flat.
Avoiding eye contact.
Yeah. Are they really fine?
Probably not.
No, the body's telling a whole other story.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes you could even feel that tension in a room,
Yeah.
even if no one's saying anything.
It's palpable. You can sense it.
So paying attention to these nonverbal cues, I think, can help us connect with people on a deeper level.
Absolutely. It adds another layer to our communication.
And this reminds me of something we talked about earlier, which is empathy.
Yes.
How does nonverbal communication kind of play into empathy?
Well, when we're truly present with someone, we're not just listening to their words, but we're observing their body language,
Right.
their facial expressions, their energy. And those nonverbal cues can give us a lot of information about what they're feeling, even if they're not explicitly saying it.
So it's about seeing,
Yes.
feeling, sensing,
Yeah.
that emotional state,
Exactly.
not just hearing the words.
And when we pick up on those cues, we can acknowledge them, validate them, and respond with compassion.
It's like you said earlier, it's that feeling with them,
Yes.
not just for them.
Exactly.
This is so interesting because I'm realizing I've probably missed a lot of those cues.
Oh, we all do. It's easy to get caught up in our own heads.
Yeah.
And miss what's right in front of us.
So what are some practical tips for how we can become more attuned to nonverbal communication, both our own and other people's?
Well, mindfulness is key. Just paying attention to how we're holding our bodies,
Okay.
how we're gesturing, what our tone of voice is like. That's the foundation.
And then once we start to become aware of our own patterns,
Right.
then we can observe other people.
Exactly. Notice how people react when you speak.
Yeah.
Do they lean in or pull away? Do
Yeah.
their eyes light up or glaze over?
Right.
Those are all clues.
That's like being a detective.
It is. You're gathering information.
Yeah.
And remember, nonverbal communication is a two-way street.
Oh, wow.
So just as we're reading other people, they're reading us.
Oh, that's a good point.
So we want to make sure that our body language is aligned with our words.
So if I'm trying to have like a heart-to-heart with my partner,
Right.
and I'm sitting there with my arms crossed and a frown on my face,
Yeah.
that's probably not going to send the message that I want to send.
Right. It's not congruent.
Yeah.
It's like actions speak louder than words.
They do.
And sometimes a simple gesture, like a warm smile, a gentle touch, can communicate more than 1,000 words.
That's beautiful. This whole conversation has been so eye-opening for me.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on communication.
I think we all do when we really start to pay attention to this stuff.
It's not just about the words.
It's everything.
It's about the energy.
Yeah.
It's about those unspoken messages.
The connection.
Yeah, creating those deep connections.
Well said.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this journey of effective communication. Remember the power to create those stronger, more fulfilling relationships. It's within you.
It is.
It starts with being a conscious communicator,
Yes.
both verbally and non-verbally.
Couldn't agree more.
So until next time, keep those conversations flowing, keep those connections strong, and keep paying attention to all those subtle but powerful cues that really reveal what's going on beneath the surface.
Beautiful.